Can I ask a question? I'm so curious. So I believe it's still the fact that you're the youngest person in Congress, right? That doesn't change. It's not a 22-year-old. It's
not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like, because you're younger than me, I feel like everybody would go to Congress and you're like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to go bully all these guys into my correct positions. I'm going to get all this work done. It's going to be awesome. What are like one or two things that you went in thinking like, this is what I'm going to do? And you're like, oh man, actual lawmaking and legislating is not what I expected it to be. Have you had any of those moments? What are like a couple like really big things that a lot of people see? Because a lot of people see a young guy going in and it's like, bro, where's our socialized healthcare? Where's our 15-hour minimum wage? Why haven't you done it yet? I thought you were representing us. Yeah.
So I'll tell you this. That's like what, like I'm gonna answer in reverse real quick. So what you just brought up, it's more of a thing nationally, right? So like, I'll post a tweet about a bipartisan bill I have. That's a step forward. It's not Medicare for all, strengthening Medicare in some sort of way, expanding it in some sort of way, right? And sometimes people on Twitter or something like that will be like, well, what about Medicare for all? You're never real progressive, blah, blah, blah. But I'll tell you, I don't really get that a lot from people in my district because I was very intentional in my campaigning. I think part of the reason why 50% of this country doesn't vote and why so many people believe government doesn't work for them, because a lot of times it doesn't, is because politicians have been lying for generations saying, vote for me, and this will happen. And it's been a problem on the left and the right. And so when I was running, because I've worked in lobbying and like I've been working in the sphere of Congress in the past, I knew that I had a better understanding, I would say, than maybe other folks who have first-time candidates of what it takes to really pass a bill and how difficult it is. So believe it or not, I never really promised any legislation in my race. I was very specific in the way I spoke about things. What I promised was a fight for our values, was a fight for these bills. I promised the promises I made were on how I would legislate and how I would co-govern with people in my community, not on vote for me and we're going to have Medicare for all tomorrow. And so I think it was really important because I think if we had more people who campaigned in a way that promised a fight and promised solidarity and didn't promise a bill, I think more people would, in the back of their mind, fully understand that members of Congress, we're advocates, we're organizers, and we're legislators. And, we need, there's 435 people in the institution. In order to pass something, we need that plus one, right? Unless it's some other type of bill. And so I think that setting the expectations with my people that I represent, that I'm accountable to in my home, was a really good decision that I'm really happy we did, because now people see us as part of the fight. We're in a celebrity culture where people like to prop up politicians as celebrities. And the problem is that there's not one congressperson who's going to change everything for us. It's not one president that's going to change for everything for us. It's a collective, and organizers, volunteers, electeds, people do mutual aid, artists, people in our culture, we all have a role to play. So either way, that didn't answer exactly what you asked, but it kind of does.
Managing expectations.
When I came in, there hasn't been a ton of situations where I've said, wow, this is, I came in thinking it would be easy and it wasn't. I will say the thing that is proving to be the most challenging, I find, is like just being able to operate in a Congress that is just completely in chaos. And for people who don't know, this Congress right now is on track to be the most unproductive Congress in the history of our country, ever.
Yeah.
And so I love this job. I just wish I got to focus on it more, but there's always some sort of crisis or something going on. Meanwhile, I go home and we're dealing with real problems, and we have an existential climate crisis that is here already. And we're, it's tough. It's tough. And that's been the thing that's been the most difficult to deal with, is actually the dysfunction in Congress. So I would say that's the most surprising.
Okay, so I'm curious, as you come into Congress, how do you balance your responsibility as a Democrat member in Congress that has to vote with the party on big legislative issues versus your responsibility as a congressman from Florida representing the interests of Florida? I understand that this Congress is historically unproductive for reasons that we won't get into, like Republicans. But how do you, have you ever had any of those moments where you're trying to think like, man, the party needs me on this, but Florida needs me on that? How do you even sort through like the correct decision-making process there?
Yeah, and I'll say sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's like, the party needs me on this, but maybe I have a values difference on it, or this and that. There's always competing priorities. The biggest one, first and foremost, is my district, and it has to be, right? Like that, those, oftentimes we kind of categorize all politicians as like working for all of us, and we do, and like I am accountable to every taxpayer, but not fully. I'm really only accountable to my district, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's why we have this system. So that way we have people who focus on their people. So I am fully accountable to the people, not just the voters, but the humans and animals and everybody of Florida's 10th congressional district. And that's first and foremost my biggest priority. The second one I always think about is the state of Florida and the South generally, because I'm a progressive in the South. We're dealing with this huge threat of right-wing neo-fascism, which is creating hostile environments for trans people, black people, immigrants. I mean, anyone who's not a wealthy white man. And so, that's the second thing I think about. And then the third thing I always think about, too, is broadly the progressive movement across the country, and how do I make sure I'm in line with this movement that I believe in, that I come from, and that ultimately I believe will be the catalyst for making sure everybody has health care, that we defeat the climate crisis and gun violence, etc. And so it's hard, a lot of times, a vote will be called and you only have a day to really digest it, and it can have big consequences or big things to think about. And me naturally, I'm like, I want to talk with a bunch of people at home about this, but sometimes you can't because you don't have that much time. And that's why the way you hire is so important, because you want the district and your values represented in the people who are going to be in the room with you when you're making the decision. So keeping the priorities, I think, is important. I have folks that I can call real quickly, right? I'll have a quick vote on immigration. I have my staff, but I have stakeholders I can hit up and say, what do you think about this? And it helps me make my decision. But ultimately, the thing I'm thinking about is when people at home read how I voted, even if they disagree with the way I voted, I want them to walk away saying, but I know Maxwell has my back. And that's the biggest thing for me, is I want everyone in my district, Republicans, Democrats, etc., to believe that I have their back and that I love them. And that's why all my press conferences in Florida start with me saying, I love you, Florida's 10th. And because that's how I want people to feel at home.
Quick question building on that. You seem to navigate the space between being a progressive and dealing with the liberals really well. I don't see a lot of criticism towards you, as some of your progressive colleagues do get attacked quite often, and you seem to take some similar positions. How do you navigate that as a progressive in this more liberal-centric Congress?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I do get dragged every so often on social media, so I won't say I'm completely immune to that, and that can be difficult. But everyone has a different style, and everybody represents a different district, right? I mean, a progressive that's representing a district in California, or a very progressive state, or et cetera, the way they talk about issues, their style of governing, it just might be a little different than mine. Because the thing about our state is, I have huge hopes and dreams for our state, for our district, for our country, the things that I believe in. I believe that basic standard of living should be a lot higher than it is now, and I think that housing is a human right, healthcare is a human right, and that we have a right to live without being shot in our communities. And I believe we need big, bold, transformational change to make that happen. It's we need government to get real big to protect us and help make sure everyone has what they need, so that way we don't have to think about government anymore, right? The goal here is people should not even have to think about politics. But I also square that with the fact that I'm in a state that is completely run by the right-wing neo-fascist movement, and it's dangerous. It is dangerous. And so I take a step back and I see that our greatest tool against this are a few things. And on the electoral, or on the ground side, mutual aid, which the whole point of mutual aid is saying, I accept we're in a broken system, and I will do everything I can in my community to protect and source the people around me. And that's incredibly important work. There's culture in the arts, which help people in a different way, and also just help ensure that we can connect, bridge the gap between cool and consciousness, which I think is important. And then we also have electoral work, which sometimes gets a bad rap, but if we're honest with ourselves, that's what decides the material conditions of our people and how we're governing, and that's important. And so in Florida, the Democratic coalition is very broad. but it has to be because it's our only chance at being able to knock off people like Ron DeSantis, which is a big priority for me. And sometimes we have fights within our Democratic coalition, but at the end of the day, we come together to elect people who we believe will be a part of that fight. And so it's hard sometimes, and we have fights within the family, but at the end of the day, the thing I always think about is we have a governor who's passing laws to literally criminalize trans kids, queer kids. Now it's illegal in the state of Florida to like drive someone who's undocumented, which think about how big of a deal that is. We just have this right-wing fascism taking over our state, and I want to make sure that I'm a part of the solution while not letting go of my values. And sometimes that might confuse people because I'll work really hard to get, if it's a moderate Democrat versus a Republican, I'm going to do everything I can to get that moderate Democrat elected. And that person will know we have disagreements on a lot of things, but at the end of the day, we have an almost existential fight in this state and in many states across the South. And it pushes us to have the broadest coalition possible.
Man, you're such an optimistic guy. What are you hopeful for the future? Like, do you see the legislation that you want coming to fruition? I mean, it's just so many people are down in the dumps, especially young people. And how do you stay so optimistic?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be down in the dumps. Things going on around the world, here at home, and we're not in a good situation in this country. But I will say, generally, that we are going in a good direction. And I've been involved in this since I was 15, like actively. When I was 15, I got involved in working at gun violence because I didn't want to get shot in school. I went to a vigil after the Sandy Hook shooting, and my life changed forever. 3 years later, a bigoted domestic terrorist walked in a Pulse nightclub in my community and murdered 49 people. And then 3 months after that, I survived an instance of gun violence in downtown Orlando, just out partying for Halloween. And so I've been a part of a movement that's so riddled with trauma, and the gun violence prevention movement's, all about ending death, that I've had a lot of moments where I've thought about just leaving and just focusing on my music and not doing it anymore. But what's kept me into it is we always get these glimmers of hope that turn into something bigger. And I feel optimistic for the future of this country. One of the biggest reasons is, think about it this way. Gen Z is the most politically active generation in the history of our country. Gen Z and millennials made up a third of the electorate last year. Gen Z and millennials are generally a very progressive generation. And half of Gen Z can't even vote yet. So I think we're getting to a place where we're able to build some real political power. I know it might not seem like it now, but we are getting to a place where I think one day we'll wake up and we'll say, wow, we've been working so hard and now we have the votes to make sure everybody in this country has health care. And we'll go in and we'll vote on it, and this will be in the future, and there'll be a president that signs it, and everybody in the world will be like, wow, this feels like it happened overnight. And for those of us who've been doing the work, we'll look at each other and we'll crack a smile because we know it was anything but overnight. And so that, I think about those days a lot, and we're coming, we're getting there. And we've hit some of those days already on some big wins, and we have a lot more to do, don't get me wrong. But, I mean, the alternative is just, not doing anything, and I just think that seals in our fate, for humanity, especially when we talk about the climate crisis. Yeah, I appreciate y'all having me on, and good luck with everything going on in the canvas and everything. And for people who feel down, it's difficult right now, but canvassing is something I really believe in for many reasons, and it's not just to win an election. Think about all the shit going on, and the fact that you go out to someone's door who might think no one cares about them in the political world, and then it's someone there who's caring about them and talking about a better world, and that can have such a big impact. And so I'm a huge fan of canvassing and being out in the community. So appreciate you, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.